Well, greetings. This is week 2, and this is lecture 2. And I wanted to take a few moments and just kind of build on what we talked about in the last lecture, which was the sacred-secular divide. One of my favorite parts of the Lord's Prayer would be the prayer part in which it says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." I think that's a profound part of the prayer that I don't always think we take seriously. Part of the reason of that is because especially within Protestant evangelicalism, we tend to be so heavenly minded that we're no earthly good. And I know that's a cliche statement, but I do think it's an important statement for us to consider in terms of spirituality or spiritual formation. That within Protestant evangelicalism, there is such a focus on escapism, or this desire to get up out of this big, bad, dark place and get to where it's good, which is heaven, which is somewhere far off, that we miss the ways in which God inhabits the whole of what we do all the time. I do think this is probably rooted in a bit of a Platonic thought. So Plato, his philosophy operated in terms of the world of the forms, which means there is for everything on earth a perfect form in heaven. And so this world isn't quite what it should be, because the world of the forms, the world we seek to get to, the perfection, the beauty, the sublime of what we desire to get to, is not to be found here in the world, though there is evidence of it. But it's to be found as we leave behind the trappings of this world and the corruption of the flesh, and we move towards that which is truly holy, that which is truly beautiful, and that which is truly sublime. And I think that Platonic thought has impacted and influenced much of Christian thought throughout history. But specifically, I think we're seeing this sort of reemergence in Protestant evangelicalism, in which we are consistently concerned about our place in heaven. And it even influences and impacts the hymnology of the church. When the roll is called up yonder, those types of songs that we've grown up singing, those songs that call us away from this world and towards another. And yet, I think there's a deep residual impact that has on our lives, and I think it feeds into this sacred and secular divide that we talked about in lecture 1. Because what that means is that I'm only ever truly spiritual when I'm trying to detach or disconnect from the world around me and trying to focus or concentrate or contemplate on the world that I would love to be in, which is heaven above. And so that means that when I go out and play with my kids, as good as that is and as right as that is in this world that I live in, it's still participating in a very corrupt, broken world, and there's nothing inherently sacred in that. That the best that I can hope for is that someday my kids and I are somewhere else in heaven together. But I tend to believe that really misses the point of the human experience, especially in light of who God is. And when I say that, I mean we need to think in terms of the incarnation itself. That the incarnation is a God who comes low and takes up his residence amongst us. That somehow divinity is found amongst humanity, that divinity is found amongst the earthly, that Jesus puts on flesh. He comes as fully human and fully God. And I think keeping that in its tension that it needs to be, the deity of Christ is the recognition that Christ in becoming flesh makes the world that we live in the flesh somehow rooted in its sacredness, that there is something sacred about being fleshy, right? And that should mean, or could mean, or I believe it might mean that when I'm out playing ball with my kids, and when they're little and we're just hanging out or building forts, that is not something that's a distraction from my sacred calling, but it may be actually me living into my sacred calling. And maybe spiritual formation is the attentiveness or the awareness that we cultivate, in which we begin to discern and discover and realize how present God is amongst us all the time and in all ways. I often joke with people that if I was not a Nazarene pastor, I would probably be a Jesuit. Jesuit is an order of the Catholic Church, and one of the things that I love about Ignatian spirituality, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that throughout the course of this course, is that the Jesuits sought to locate spirituality in the realm of everything at all times in every ways. It's almost in terms as if God is present in the midst of everything that we do. And so whether I'm washing dishes, whether I'm clipping my toenails, whether I'm playing with my dog, whether I'm watering my yard, somehow God's presence is there in the midst of all that I do. And it makes me think in terms of what would it look like to live my whole life as a prayer, that my whole life is as an offering to God, that there is something beautiful, or God takes pleasure when I'm living the whole of my life, even the mundane moments of my life, under the view of God's grace and His mercy and His love, and by participating in God in those ways, that I am really, I guess I would say, I'm really appreciating the beauty of all that God is and all that God has made this world to be. And I think that's a significant thing for us as we lean into our spiritual formation. What would it look like, instead of thinking in terms of broken episodic moments throughout my day in which I'm spiritual, i.e. I get up, I have my devotion, I read my Bible, I pray. Later on in the middle of the day, I might pray before I go to bed, or have prayer time with my family. I may go to church on Sundays, church on Wednesdays. I might be in a small group. And these episodic moments of our day, these are the days when I'm truly spiritual. What if we were able to, in our spiritual formation, cultivate the kind of life and awareness that the whole of my life is lived as the beloved in the presence of God, who's at work in the whole of my life every single day in every way. And that whatever I do, whether in word or deed, I do so in the name of Jesus Christ to bring glory to Him. And that somehow God inhabits all of that space and in terms sanctifies that space. Meaning that what I do at work, the mundane activities of my day-to-day work, and for some of my friends who attend my church, helping them to understand that when you are standing on the factory line, that is not a place void of God's presence, but that you do what you do in the presence of God and fulfilling your divine calling. I was speaking to a young chiropractor major today, and we spoke about how instead of him seeing his job as just a job to do, to get through, to get the money that he wants, what if instead he begins to see that as the divine calling in which he is participating in the healing of God, and that in the work that he does on the body of someone else and restoring it back to its original health, that he is participating in the beauty and the goodness of God's healing, redemptive, restorative purposes in the world at all times and in all ways. What if our people begin to see themselves as living that kind of life under that kind of umbrella in that kind of way? I believe that it would reinfuse the whole of our lives, every word we speak, every conversation we have, every action we take, every step that our feet direct us towards. I believe we would begin to recognize that those somehow bear witness and bear glimpses to God's presence, and that God can meet us in any of those moments. God can meet me in the smile of my child. God can meet me in the voice of my boss at work. God can meet me in the client that I help out. God can meet me even as I mow my yard. God can meet me moment by moment and day by day, even as I get ready in the morning, as I'm reminded, as I'm showering, as I'm brushing my teeth, as I'm looking in the mirror, that I get to do today. And I think it takes us from a survival to a thrival mentality. I think that's what spiritual formation would hopefully do, is it would move us into the belief that Jesus says that I've come that they might have life and have it abundantly. But the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And I think one of the things the thief does to steal, kill, and destroy is distract us from the divinity, from the sacredness of life that is all around us. But that abundance is found, lived in the presence of God, who inhabits, doesn't wait for us to get somewhere else for us to be spiritual or sacred or contemplate on something else, but to be present in moment by moment. There's a great thought by Brennan Manning in his book Ruthless Trust, in which he calls it the theology of nowhere. That too much of our spirituality is rooted in getting somewhere else, so we're never really anywhere. He says instead of a theology of nowhere, maybe we ought to change that wording a little bit and call it the theology of now here, that somehow being present in the moment and attending to the grace of God, the presence of God, the mercy of God, the love of God, moment by moment in whatever I do, to be truly present as I sit with someone who's sharing their life with me, to be truly present as I work on my sermon, to be truly present in the dark, deep, nasty places of life in which God, I have to believe that even God is present there, and that beauty can shine even through those ashes, so that I begin to live in anticipation and expectation of all that God is and all that God begins to do. And so when we break free from the sacred secular divide and we begin to realize that God has come down and inhabited this space with us, that the presence of God is to be anticipated and expected in everything that we do, that somehow God's Spirit fills that world up, and it leads us to a life of wonder, out of the pragmatism and the minutia of every day in which we're trapped by just rote getting by, but instead it catapults us into a world of wonder and amazement and awe and gratitude. And we'll pick that back up in the next lecture.